All right, you guys. So finally, I'm here doing, I think it's segment 4, and this one it's going to be talking about reptilian brain and relationships, what happens in relationships when we get activated and triggered, what happens in the brain, and what we can do about it. Oh my gosh. I've been chomping at the bit to get to this because it's so important. I think that most of us struggle in relationships. Conflict happens a lot in relationships, and a lot of us feel like there's something wrong with us, or a lot of times maybe it's the relationship, and actually that's not always true. Relationships are going to bring up our stuff, okay? That's the good and the bad news, and so we'll get a little bit more into that. We'll get a little bit more into why that is, and hopefully it'll bring some clarity. Again, I'm doing these videos really just to help people kind of understand what's going on inside of them. It helps to know it, so a lot of times we don't personalize, and we can kind of ride the wave, right? That is our emotions, or that in the moment when we get activated, figuring out what we need to do to get into that higher brain, and how we can kind of help and support our partners to do that too. I think it gives us greater understanding, and really it helps us to know that the whole point is healing. Oh my gosh, it really is. Relationships hold the greatest potential to help us to heal. Okay, so we're gonna get into it. Let's do it. I'm going to start again by drawing a brain that will probably not look like one. So expectation is low. Okay, so we've got a brain. Like we talked about before, we've got our reptilian brain, right? So our brain. And what do we know about reptilian brain? You got the 3 F's, the fight, flight, freeze. We've already done this. So this is all kind of a review. And we know it's survival. And we know that when we're in this part of the brain, because it's survival and we think it's a threat to physical survival, we are super focused on action. So it's all about acting. Again, if a lion were to come, or a man with a knife were to come into a room, we're going to need to do something immediately. We don't have time to think about it. We don't have time to problem solve. Acting is vital. Okay, so the problem is, and I think I went into amygdala, I might not have actually, but human beings, we have another part of our brain, and it's known as the amygdala, and this is the emotional part of the brain. The problem is our amygdala, when it gets activated, and your amygdala will get activated, let's say your boss comes out screaming at you, or your boyfriend says something, or your girlfriend, or your spouse, or whatever, and it activates you, you get an emotional response, it goes right to reptilian brain for the most part, which is really unfortunate, right? Because we know that obviously reptilian brain wants to act. We also know that reptilian brain, when it can't act, what happens? Well, it ends up getting stuck with its thoughts because there's nothing to do, right? So if your boss is screaming at you, red face, reptilian brain or amygdala reacts, and it goes right into reptilian brain. We want to act, but you're not going to fight, really, hopefully. Hopefully you won't do that. And so we know we can't fight, and there's no lion, but yet there's this propensity to act. But since there's really nothing to do, we are stuck with our thoughts. Okay. And again, what do we know about our thoughts? Our thoughts are going to be super distorted. They're going to be all negative. They're going to be 150% fear-based, right? Because again, we think there's a threat to our survival happening, so it's all fear. It's going to be all or nothing. It's the always, never, nobody, everybody. And because you're in this part of the brain that tells you that you are in danger physically, whoever's around you for the most part, and if it's your spouse or your boss or whoever, they suddenly will become your enemy, okay? Which is crazy. And I know that this happens with me and my husband, we'll be great, everything's fine, and then all of a sudden he says something, boom, I go right into there, and he's suddenly my enemy. And I'm sure I'm his too. And it doesn't make any sense. It's not logical at all, but it's our reptilian brain. Okay. So, like we talked about last time, one of the most important things is obviously knowing when you're in reptilian brain. Super vital. So I'm going to write that. Number 1, knowing you're in reptilian brain. Which sounds funny, but again, when you're down here and you have this propensity to act because your reptilian brain is activated by your amygdala, your thoughts kick in because there's nothing to do, and you got this distortions and these negative thoughts, and it's all or nothing, and it's like everybody, nobody, everybody, or always, never, you never listen to me, I'm always going to feel this way, it's never going to get better. Those thoughts kick in. What it's also telling you is that how you are feeling is 100% truth. Okay, that's like the kicker. So for me, knowing that, oh my gosh, when I start saying always, never, nobody, everybody, when all of a sudden my partner becomes my enemy, I know I'm in reptilian brain. Even though I am indignant when I'm in reptilian brain, I feel like I'm justified in being there. I dig my heels in, and I know that it's truth, even though it's not, okay? So that's the biggest piece. That's why I put knowing you're in reptilian brain, because some people might go, well, how could you not know? Believe me, I've had so many clients come into my room, and one in particular, it was a couple, and right away, you know, she sits down and she looks over at her partner and she's like, I'm leaving him, Amy, and no, I'm not in reptilian brain. I didn't say anything, but I'm like, yeah, you are. Anyway, throughout the session, I was able to work with them. I was able to kind of get them into their higher brain, and of course, she wasn't going to leave him, you know. And at the end of the session, I said, by the way, you were in reptilian brain. She says, I know. So it's funny, and for me, you know, there's times where it gets pointed out, you know, or, you know, I've talked to my daughter or even my husband, and he'll be like, oh, you're in your reptilian brain. When I'm in there, I don't want to get out. My daughter said that once to me, you know. She said, Mommy, I'm getting really good at knowing when I'm in reptilian brain. I think I said this last time. But when I'm down there, I don't want to get out. I said, I know, because it's really weird. We feel justified in being there. So a part of it is really getting super hyper aware of what's going on in your experience so you can start to interrupt it. Okay, so then like I said before, you know, the second thing is, you know, knowing how to manage. And, you know, number one is, you know, you can get into higher brain, or number two, you can process, right? And I'm just going to do higher brain very quickly up here. We know that this is logic and problem solving and big picture thinking and clarity and hope and assessing consequences. All those things are higher brain, which is up here. And we know that when the reptilian brain gets activated, we lose contact with higher brain, right? So, now this is all the stuff we went through just talking about reptilian brain. Well, how this applies to relationships is important. Okay, so when you're in a relationship and all of a sudden you get activated and amygdala communicates with reptilian brain, bam, you're in this lower brain state. You know, I said before, knowing how to manage, like if you're by yourself, higher brain process. The most important thing to know when you're in a relationship, and if you get triggered, or your partner gets triggered, or if you both get triggered, for the most part, you need to, before anything else, take a time out. That is so incredibly vital. Unless, now this is the one wrinkle, unless your partner gets triggered and you're not triggered, or vice versa, and you could potentially help them up into higher brain. Now, is that your job to help them up into higher brain? No. Okay, so this is the deal. If you get activated, your job is to help yourself self-soothe. If your partner gets activated, that's their job too. That's kind of our lot in life, is figuring out how to soothe ourselves, figuring out how to get ourselves into higher brain, okay? So if you go into activation and your partner does it, they might know things that might help. So of course they can support you in that, you know? And as adults, or as a parent, I do that naturally for my daughter. I know I talked about that in the reptilian brain video, that humor is a good strategy in getting into higher brain. And I do that with my daughter all the time, so it works. But I'm doing it with her and then talking to her about it. So next time she's alone, or, you know, 5-10 years from now, when she's kind of out on her own potentially, she'll kind of know what to do. I want her to develop the skill sets so she knows how to self-soothe. So again, you can help your partner potentially, but more often than not, you're going to take an immediate time out, okay? And then from there, you're going to figure out what each of you needs to do to feel better. So like I said before, ways into higher brain. So, you know, time out, and then you could go into higher brain, or you could go into processing. So we know number one easiest way into higher brain, like I said before, is humor. The second is thinking about hopes and dreams. And this is in no particular order, whatever works for you, that's the thing, okay? So this is the deal in life. Figuring out what works and what helps you get into your higher brain is going to be totally different than what works and gets your friend into higher brain, okay? For me, I know there's a few things that work every time. Humor, meditation, doing any type of yoga, going for a walk, obviously working out, journaling, doing my I love list. Those are the things that work for me. Okay, so the journey for you is figuring out what those things are. Okay, in the moment, and you're not going to know until the moment kicks in. So I'm going to keep writing some of these though, just as options to remind us what they are. So we got humor, we have hopes and dreams. Another one is the I love list that I went into last time. Also gratitude lists, just naming what you're grateful for. Or you can meditate on it at the end of your day, thinking about all the cool things that happened that day. Meditation is just a really good one. Obviously prayer, depending on what your religious or spiritual beliefs are. And then I put coping skills here because for the most part, anything that we enjoy activates our higher brain, okay? So we know that whenever we do any of these things, we activate higher brain, and our brain is a muscle, so we start to hopefully develop some neural pathways that start to dominate a little bit. That's kind of the goal. And the more you do these things and the more you practice them, the more that part of the brain is going to get stronger, okay? So going back to this whole idea, when we go through a lot of trauma, what happens is, and if it's an emotional trauma, right, what happens is our amygdala and reptilian brain, there's a neural pathway here that kind of binds them, okay? So one of the things that we're going to want to do is to start to develop that higher brain so it lessens the strength of the amygdala reptilian brain hold. That's the goal. Okay, so this is the wrinkle though. In relationships. Okay. So what's going to probably happen in relationships? And there's this dude, his name's Harville Hendrix. He's a writer in the 70s. He wrote a book and it was called Getting the Love You Want. Absolutely, I think, amazing and groundbreaking, his theory. His idea was that the more attracted you are to somebody, the more that they're going to activate your amygdala reptilian brain neural pathways. He didn't say it like that because the whole neural pathway, that even understanding the amygdala and reptilian brain, that wasn't even happening in the 70s. What he said was that the more attracted you are to somebody, the more they're going to bring up your stuff. Okay. So for me, the way I frame that now is that the more you're attracted to somebody, the more that they're going to activate this part of the brain, more than likely, because it's going to bring up scar tissue from your past. Okay. So how does that translate? Well, for some of us, and I know I shared I didn't go totally into my story, but I shared a little bit about myself. I had a lot of trauma, and I had one particular one, and it involved a loss when I was 17. Somebody incredibly close to me that I very much loved, and so after this person died, I was super changed. I had massive amygdala reptilian brain scar tissue or neural pathway development. So what that meant was it really, that event was so significant, and I had so much repressed energy around it, and I had so many emotions around it, it really pulled me in my reptilian brain. So I suffered from depression for a long time. Well, how that showed up in relationships was anybody that I get into a relationship with, my amygdala would activate my reptilian brain like that. Okay, so I was in a fight, flight, freeze place in romantic relationships probably for a good 20 years. And I still kind of get there. Actually not as bad though, because I've done a lot of healing. I didn't understand this when I was younger. I totally thought there was something wrong with me. I was like, okay, I'm just better single. Because whenever I get into these relationships, I would get overwhelmed with a ton of emotions that would get flooded, and I would totally get just shot down to reptilian brain thought patterns, okay? And I really couldn't figure out what to do about it. So this is the deal. What needs to happen when our partner brings up our scar tissue? Now, instead of, and this is the mistake I probably made really early on, was instead of thinking it was about the relationship with that person, what you need to do is go, oh my gosh, this is my scar tissue. Hello, you're bringing up my scar tissue right now. Give me a minute. Let me go process this. Okay. You're gonna let that let that relationship be a catalyst, because it's like a magnet for all of that muck inside of you, and you're gonna go and take that muck, and then you're gonna go heal it. That's something that I didn't do early on. I focused too much on the relationship, thinking it was the relationship that was the cause of what I was feeling, instead of going, oh no, this is just bringing up all my hurt. this is bringing up all my fear. This is bringing up the fear that this is going to happen again. I didn't get into that. That's what I needed to do. I needed to bring that focus inward and heal. And I made the mistake of a lot of times focusing outwardly on the relationship, right? So I learned that. Now I know that, you know, when my muck gets brought up, I go, okay, you know what? As much as I want to engage with you and make this about you, I know that I need to take a time out. I need to go journal what I'm feeling, or I need to go into my higher brain. You know, there's times obviously that we get triggered in relationships, and it might not always warrant a massive processing session. And it might just be that, okay, you just brought up a memory of this, or you just brought up some negative self-talk. I need to just get into my higher brain so I can shift out of this and I can think more clearly, you know? But I will say that for most of the couples that I work with, it really is, there's scar tissue there. So most of those triggers are things that you're gonna have to heal. Okay, so going back to this, what we know is that when you have a lot of scar tissue buildup, right, or a lot of neural pathway development between the amygdala and reptilian brain, it's gonna result in symptoms. And like I said before, those symptoms are like depression, anxiety, OCD, rage, triggers in general. And then when we have these symptoms, there's so much muck in there that we end up creating a lot of addictions. I know I did that, right? Whether it's substance abuse, you know, it could be food, it could be, you know, relationships, by the way, you know, those can become addictions that just keep us focused outside of ourselves instead of going in and trying to heal that scar tissue stuff. Anything that we're fixated on outwardly, that's a distraction. That's kind of a part of that, and it's indicative of these symptoms, right? So like I said before, the journey is to start to heal these guys in order to lessen these neural pathways so they start to fade, and in order for this higher brain to dominate more, you've got to lessen that, right? And the way you lessen it is through healing. So relationships in this context are absolutely a divine thing, because I don't know about you, but most of the time when I was single, I was always okay. Actually, I used to say that. Like I think I even said it earlier. I'm always okay when I'm single. Nobody brought up my scar tissue. Well, of course they didn't. It wasn't a similar context. It wasn't going to be a trigger. Okay, so relationships have been the most important thing for me, romantic relationships, because they brought up my scar tissue. Because we get really good at repressing this. We get really good at distracting ourselves from all of that pain, because of course, and it's so adaptive. Why do we want to feel that pain again? Why do we want to revisit it? Why do we want to remember it, right? So we get really good at detaching from it, distracting, and keeping it at bay. And so these wonderful relationships that come into our lives, and for some people it might be a peer relationship, or it might be a professional relationship that triggers you. Who knows? For me, it was in romantic relationships. But they ended up being such a blessing in disguise, even though it was a very rocky road for a long time, because they forced me to really acknowledge and eventually heal that scar tissue. Okay, so this is the cool piece, right? As soon as you start to heal this scar tissue and it starts to fade, what then happens is you can start to create space almost. I don't think anatomically, but just almost figuratively, you can start to create some space between your amygdala and your reptilian brain. So instead of amygdala, reptilian brain, bam, bam, it's stimulus, response, space in between, okay? So what that means is something happens and you stop and you go, oh, wait a minute, how do I want to respond? So all of a sudden your amygdala hooks to your higher brain, which is what you want it to do anyways, because if you have an emotional thing happening with a relationship in your life, it would be super awesome if we had access to higher brain functions like logic, problem solving, assessing consequences. Would be really, really awesome, okay, and adaptive. So that's the goal, is to start to help us create those neural pathways so it does hook your amygdala to your higher brain. All right, so that's the thing. So that's the good news and the bad news in romantic relationships. So a couple key things. One thing that's so important with your partner, please, please, please be gentle with their scar tissue. I can't tell you how many times I have clients come in and, you know, maybe he's triggered by something that happens, that she does, and a lot of times it's an infidelity thing, right? For him, so one couple in particular, he gets triggered by infidelity or the thought of infidelity. Obviously she's not cheating on him, but just he gets jealous, right? And instead, and what does she do? She takes it personal and she gets defensive. And it's like, why doesn't he trust me? And I go, yeah, it's his scar tissue though. So it's not you, right? So as much as he needs to go, oh, that's my stuff. That's my scar tissue. Let me go heal it. She needs to go, oh, that's a scar tissue. Let me not personalize. Because I think that that's the biggest thing, is starting to tease apart what's now and what's past. Okay, and remember, a trigger, unless there's a really significant event happening right now, is most of the time 99% past, 1% now. So I always tell people, you just put on your ghost-covered glasses, right? Or you're just projecting literally 20 years ago on right now. Some people will even name that, like, oh, my ghosts are up right now, you know, or my scar tissue, or this is my stuff. Because then that cues their partner to go, oh, okay, so wait a minute, this is not me. I'm not doing this. This is them. Okay. So I know it's a tricky one to tease that, and it's tricky because, you know, that, like my clients that I was talking about, where he gets triggered and he gets jealous, that brings up some scar tissue for her, you know, where she feels like she's not doing it right, and et cetera, et cetera. So predictably, and this is another thing, your triggers are going to trigger each other, okay? So that's why it's really important to know what your triggers are, and maybe that's one of the first things you start to have a conversation with your partner, to go, these are the things that trigger me, and this is why. So they can identify that, and they can go, okay, good. So when you get that way, it really isn't about me, that's just your past scar tissue. And then you can be gentle with each other. I get firm with my clients sometimes, and I'm like, be nice, that's their scar tissue. They're not doing it on purpose. They're trying to heal, you know? And be gentle with yourself, because I think a lot of times we beat up on ourselves when it comes to this. So that's the one thing to know. So another thing that I really need to mention, this timeout thing is really hard sometimes for particular people. Another dynamic in relationships, and this is hilarious to me, it's like we're stacked with all these obstacles almost, and maybe that's good because it forces us to, you know, grow. We're totally challenged as human beings, I think, in a lot of ways. But in relationships, there's a dynamic, and it's known as the pursuer-distancer dynamic, right? So what that means is that in these moments of conflict, there's generally one that needs to work it out right now, or they're gonna die, right? They do not want to go to bed angry. They want to, even though it's 10:30 and you're supposed to be in bed at 9:30, they want to work it out. They need to, or else they're gonna explode. Okay. And then you've got the other person that's the distancer, that's overwhelmed and can't even think straight. So the distancer starts to back up, and those are usually the ones that will leave the room, or go, I'm done, or storm off, or drive away. Those are the distancers. And it's because they're so overstimulated and overwhelmed internally that they've got this fear of engulfment that's happening to them. Okay, the pursuer, however, has this fear of abandonment. So the more the distancer pulls away, the more that they get really panicky, right? Because it feels like it's going to be the loss of the relationship. So the hard part is going to be for the pursuer, and I am so sorry for the pursuer to know this, because you have to take a time out. There is no other way. Two people in reptilian brain cannot interact. It's not going to happen. You guys are enemies. Nothing good's going to come of it. And again, remember, when we're in reptilian brain, it's 2% of our brain. It's not true. You're not using the part of the brain that you need to be using in order to even communicate. You're using the part of the brain that is literally developed only to act, not even to think, right? So coming up with a good strategy with your partner, maybe there's like a cue word that you can say, or it's very incumbent upon the distancer to say something that might help the pursuer, at least to say, hey, we just need a timeout. Because the distancer is the one that really is going to be more okay with the separating. So I usually put it on the distancer a little bit, not that they have to take care of the pursuer in those moments, but just to be gentle, because even though timeout's going to be relieving to you, it's not going to be to your partner. So you're going to want to say, look, we need a timeout. Let's talk about this tomorrow at 2. Or, you know, I kind of like saying something like, look, I love you so much. We're both triggered. We're not in our right brain. Let's give it a little bit of time. Let's talk about this tomorrow when we're in our higher brain. So then there's a relief that we're not breaking up. We're not destroying the relationship. It's just a timeout for now. Okay. And another thing that you need to know, do not ever, ever, ever make an important decision in reptilian brain. So that means you're not going to break up. You're not going to move out of the house. You're not going to, move out of the country or do anything when you're in 2% of your brain. That's probably not a good idea. Whatever decision you make in that part of the brain will not stick anyways. So, and this is a tricky one for those of you that throw down to the relationship and threaten the relationship and break up, because once you start to do that, that can become a pattern. That could be the go-to, that, well, I'm done, I just want a divorce, or I'm done, da da da. So you're really gonna have to try to interrupt that, okay? Because, and I'll tell people this, if you really want to break up with somebody, you're gonna feel that way every day for 30 days. So tell yourself, look, if I feel this way every day for the next month, then I'll leave, okay? Because if you're gonna leave, or you're gonna decide to transition out, or to make a big life decision, you're gonna do it when you're in your higher brain. Do not do it when you're in your lower brain, because you're gonna regret it just because it's your lower brain, okay? So now, this being said, if there's obviously abuse in the relationship, that's something different, okay? But I will say domestic violence and abuse tends to happen when we stay too long, okay? I had one couple that I was working with, and when they first started to see me, their arguments would last 10 to 12 hours, and a lot of times one of them would be hospitalized at the end of it. Okay, it was like that crazy. I mean, right away I was like, what are you guys doing? You have to do timeout like immediately. Now it's been like a year, and they're so awesome. I'm so proud of them. They're like my kids, but they're not. But I mean, they're really understanding this, and they interrupt it right away. You know, I think the longest maybe like half an hour or something, but not to the degree, okay? So it's that pursue or distance or dynamic. Again, that'll end up in an explosion. So that's why we have to interrupt it sooner than later, okay? So hopefully this was helpful. Yeah, just having this conversation even. I love, you know, if you want to share this video with your loved one, or, you know, when I see couples in here, or if I see an individual in here and we start talking a little bit about the brain, you know, a lot of times they'll bring their partner in so we can kind of work on this with each other. The big thing is you're just going to want to get really good at identifying when you guys are triggered, taking a time out, learning what each other's scar tissue and triggers are, so you don't personalize, because that's so important. We personalize everything when we're down here because we think that we're in danger, right? And that our partner's our enemy, but it's an absolute lie. So learning what their scar tissue is and learning what your scar tissue is for them is going to be so important to help you to not personalize, okay? And then figuring out, again, what are the things you need to be doing after you take that time out. You know, do you need to go listen to music? Do you need to go do, you know, your meditation? Do you need to, you know, go for a walk, or, you know, go watch something funny, or go look up funny memes on Facebook or whatever? You know what I mean? Whatever it is, figure out what that is for you that works. And then you guys can share that with each other. So it could be like, honey, I don't think you're feeling good. Maybe go listen to music, or maybe go take the dogs for a walk, or, you know, because I do think it's really cool if we can kind of support each other in this healing process, because that's kind of, again, I think why we come together. And I think that that's the whole point, is to help each other to heal so we can be more real, more authentic, more whole. Right? And then really fundamentally, we can feel better, and we can spend more time up in our higher brain than down here. Because when we're down here, again, it just is representing that scar tissue. That's all past stuff. So know that your relationships are going to bring them up. You are not crazy, okay? And it's okay to have scar tissue. It's totally normal. I think I felt that way about myself for a long time, that I was like thoroughly damaged. And thank God I went through what I went through. That's why I do what I do, right? So it's not, you know, what you've been through is actually something to wear with a badge of honor, that scar tissue. It shows how strong you are. And now the goal is to really help you to heal that in a deeper way, so you can feel good all the time, and you can be in your higher brain all the time, because why not? It's just a better way to live. So I think that's it for now. I'll probably end up rewatching it and add more later, but I just wanted to get this out sooner than later to you guys, and hopefully it's helpful. Okay, so the next segment might be a part B. I'll probably end up doing a little bit more in depth with triggers, and yeah, we'll see where it goes from there. Okay, thanks for coming. Bye.